Welcome to Module 11, Designing Traditional Test Items. We're going to talk about how and why it's important to develop traditional classroom assessments. These will be for the units you've designed. You need to know why it's important and how, because you will eventually need to plan, design, build, and evaluate tests and assessments that truly assess what you want students to learn, and they will be in many different forms. If you remember our professional eye, not every published curriculum you'll encounter provides adequately designed or targeted assessments. Surprisingly enough, because they spend a lot of time developing assessments. But they don't know your students. At best, tests provide opportunities for reflection and reteaching, and at worst, they provide accountability for coverage. And you know the twin sins of backwards design or standards-based assessment, so we don't want just coverage. If you're designing your own curriculum, you will need some objective measures of how students are progressing with the content. And that's what we're going to be doing in this module. If you want to know what your students learned in relation to your learning targets, the ones you're teaching in your classroom, you must either create or select assessment items that will provide evidence of what students have learned. So, evidence-based learning. You're using the evidence to actually design instruction. And you're also providing feedback for your students. Poorly written or invalid test items will give you and your students poor information and make it hard to adjust instruction to meet students' real needs. So you really have to think toward your standards and towards your goals in terms of how you're creating your assessments. As I said, learning goals, learning activities, and assessment strategies are interwoven. You want to identify your desired results. You've done that with standards and your objectives. You've made your units. You've designed learning activities to address the assessment strategies that you designed on your learning goals. So really it's just this whole cycle, and it can go either direction, right? But really it goes learning, assessment, learning activities, learning goals, and so forth. It's always a process of reimagining and redesigning your instruction based on assessment. So you're going to be building a series of assessments for your units. When you create your test item bank, you're going to include at least 3 items of each type of these assessments for present and future use. You're going to create some multiple choice items, short answer items, matching test items, true-false items, and 2 different types of completion items. Actually, 3 different types of completion items. As you're building your test, of course you need to plan. And you need to plan because your instruction depends on your assessment, and your assessment drives instruction. So on page 210 in Taylor, there's a really wonderful test map for really advanced planning for your assessments. You can use that for this practice. The assessment plans that you make are the guides for your unit, for the quarter, for the semester, however long you have, and what type of assessments they are. Like your culminating performance tasks are for the entire unit, but there are also assessments along the way. We talked about formative and summative, but they are all very specific types of assessments that you're going to create now. They're based directly on the learning objectives and your instruction. Criterion or content-based, and criterion or content-based just means what the material is that you're actually teaching. And you're going to choose the best type of assessments to use for what you're teaching. Presentation is everything. So when you create these items, you really need to think about how your students see. For most students, font 12 or font 14 is really adequate. Space, organization, level of language that you use, even the font size and style is really tiny there because, and red and italics because it's going to catch your eye. For elementary students, the younger students, 14 size font is preferable. 16 is big, but for the little guys, you definitely want something either 16 or 18 point because they're still learning to see. Their bodies are still developing. Oddly enough, even the way you create tests has to do with the developmental level of your students. You want to keep in mind the time you need to take the test and the students need, and you need the format the same for similar test items so that there are no surprises. So when you create the test items, when a student sees what it looks like, they know the routine. They know what to do. So one of the big things about creating standardized test items is that many of them require what are called distractors. Multiple choice items have distractors, true false items have distractors, matching has distractors, and completion items with word lists have distractors. The purpose of distractors are to confirm that students aren't just guessing, that they actually have an understanding of the content you're assessing. So all of these types of assessments will have distractors on your traditional test items. So let's look and see what a distractor looks like. This is from a kindergarten classroom, maybe it's a first grade classroom, of rhyming words. And the students are supposed to identify, this is more like a matching. You're not making a test like this. What I'm doing is showing you what distractors actually are. So they're matching words that have the same sounds. So you have cone and bone, you have bat and cat, you have jeep and sheep, and they're all mixed up. This is like a matching test, so that the students just don't automatically pair pictures up. But there are two distractors. One of them is the log, and one of them is the yarn. Neither of these fit the pattern of rhyming. So the students will not be marking yarn, and they will not be marking log. And this is the kind of thing you're going to set up in all of these items. It's like there are items that clearly don't belong. They look like the other items. They have the same format. We just talked about format, but they don't fit the criteria. And this has two distractors, which is really great. I don't see that too often. Most of the time you see multiple choice tests. If you select multiple choice tests and you choose to use something from a commercial curriculum, you'll find they don't have distractors. So you have to add the distractor, and that is expected. But I wanted you to know what it is, what it looks like, and what it's for, because it helps them. It shows you the depth of knowledge that they have with the content that you're teaching. That's why you have distractors in it, so that they can differentiate between what's correct and what is not correct, what doesn't fit the criteria, as I said. So in your book, there's a great chart, and this is really what you're looking at when you're designing your tests. Which test fits for what? So even though the tests come in an order because they're on a graphic organizer, that doesn't mean that's where they fall in your unit. They fall where they belong. Where does the essay item belong? Where does the performance task belong? Where do the multiple choice items belong? Where do the short answer items belong? Sentence completion, close, true, false, and matching. They all have a different purpose. So that if you're asking students to recall facts, you're going to use multiple choice items. You're going to use short answer items. Many items suit that purpose. But you don't want to just sit with just recognition and recall of facts, obviously. So if you notice, if you look down this list a little bit, you'll notice it's actually designed around Bloom's taxonomy, so that you have all the way from recognition all the way to evaluation and synthesis. And depending on what you're asking students to do is the type of assessment you're going to provide. So you want to make sure that your test item matches the understanding you're requiring from your students. So you are thinking about higher order thinking as you're designing your test items, and some of them will require more than others. So more likely the lower levels of Bloom and Krathwohl will fit more at the beginning of your units, where you're starting to transmit knowledge. And toward the end of it, you're going to use the higher level thinking skills, because you're starting to have students synthesize, evaluate, and apply what you've been teaching them. That's what the scaffolding is about. So don't just let your assessments be what and how many and who. You need to think about the kind of understanding you're eliciting with your test item. For example, how many years, what's the difference in understanding between how many years did the Civil War last versus how did the Battle of Gettysburg affect the outcome of the Civil War? This would be for middle school students. The difference is very clear. The first one just asks for recall. It's like, how many years did it last? It does not demand any kind of understanding. Where the last one actually requires students to apply and be empathetic with the outcomes of the Civil War, which moves you into the 6 facets of learning, which are promoted by this understanding by design. So these students are now showing sympathy. They're demonstrating perspective, perhaps even a little bit of self-knowledge as you move along. So the 6 facets of learning, very similar to Bloom-Krathwohl, you want students to be able to do most of these things by the time they're done with your unit. Explain, interpret, apply, shift perspective, show sympathy, demonstrate self-knowledge, and so forth. So you want to make your assessments useful and deep. That's your goal. Useful and deep. One of the things we always talk about, and one of the things you were assessed on the rubrics, for example, was reliability. And we'll just have a quick conversation about validity and reliability. Validity just basically has to do with, does what you're testing represent what you're teaching? Is the test valid in that sense? It's called face validity. So does it measure accurately or assess or capture the specific content that you're teaching? You're the researcher. You're teaching the students. You're exploring to see how these students have learned what you've taught. Does it fairly represent what you've taught? Does it truly represent what you've taught? Does it match your instruction? Do you have very valid test item types, depending, again, if you go back to that map, about what kind of test you're using for what kind of understanding. And then reliability is, can anybody give this and get pretty much the same answers as you did from the students if they've taught the curriculum the way you've taught it? So are the directions and expectations clear so students know exactly what is expected of them? So for every set of test items, you are going to provide directions and expectations for each one of them, because otherwise nobody knows what to do. And again, remember that you're handing your units to people that will be using them that have never seen them before. Just like when somebody hands you a giant teacher's guide, you need instructions. So do the people with your assessments, and so do the students who take them. Do your scoring rules show clear and meaningful distinctions between levels of knowledge and skill? So you're setting up scoring criteria for each of your traditional test items so that they can be reliably assessed. And so students know reliably what they're being expected to do. Are the scoring rules consistently applied? You're not doing much with inter-rater reliability, but if we were to have 5 people give this test and they get back similar answers or almost the same answers, the closer they provide scores, the more reliable the assessment. I hope that made sense. How do the above elements provide a consistent level of generalization applicable to the content and to student skills? And it's everything that I've been saying. It's like, can you use this with most students, and most students will give you similar answers, similar or the same answers. And it will be scored in a similar, almost exactly the same fashion. A reminder for you when you're using, not for this because you're creating your own original assessments, but when you use pre-published assessments, always review the assessments provided by the publishers to ensure that they really do meet your learning objectives and goals and will give both you and the stakeholders meaningful information. Once again, any kind of pre-published material you get is designed for a large body of students, a wide range of audience, and you've got to narrow it down or, do a little bit of selecting, of removing items that aren't applicable. Most of the time, you can't teach everything in a curriculum guide. So you don't want to test things you haven't taught. So you either eliminate the item, mark it out, change the item so that it does reflect what you've assessed. So you can do that. You can review them and change them as appropriate for your curriculum and your students. Testing tip feedback. Feedback is used, and even though you are not planning this for putting this in your unit design, you always want to remember that you're going to give feedback and use the test information to inform instruction and to let parents know how their students are doing in your classrooms. So feedback, as maybe you've already recognized in this class, is used to improve skills, knowledge, and understanding. You want to help your students' parents know how they're doing in class relative to the goals and the standards. Remember, standards-based assessments. Provide feedback with questions, information based on established criteria. You're using data, evidence-based assessment, and evidence-based instruction. You have established criteria from which to provide feedback. So again, that's the whole reliability thing. Your criteria have been established so that you can provide consistent feedback to everybody, students and parents and administrators alike, and then for yourself. So you find the success, you correct what needs to be corrected or modified, and then reinforces success. As our bad dog says to his master, he says, I'm going to need more specific feedback on my formative assessments. What does bad dog mean? We want to be much more specific. So your tasks for your traditional test items are to create 3 test items for each type of traditional test based on the material from the module that are aligned directly with your unit objectives. You'll have somebody go over the test items with you. Please do that. I highly recommend it, even if it's your best friend, because you want them to look at it and either go, do the RCA dog look, go, what? Or, oh, that's really, yeah, I get that. It's clear. I can do this. Complete the reflection on the test items in the discussion forum. You are going to put the traditional test items in 2 places in your UBD unit. You're going to put them in your test item bank, and they just need to be identified as what kind of test item they are and what the content of the test item is, not the entire test item, because you're going to attach the test item bank to the unit. The other place you're going to do that, you're going to put the type of test item and the label, the content label, is in the lesson where it belongs. Remember what I said, there's scaffolding and they belong in different places. Where does each test item belong in your unit? Where will you put it? And you put the multiple choice test items, Industrial Revolution. That's the kind of thing you're going to put in both your test item bank and your lessons. You don't have to put the entire assessment. That goes in your whole document that you'll attach. There's a reflection to go along with it, and you'll put that in the discussion forum. New subject, new topic. I'm going to go over this quickly because you're just doing the first 4 steps. You're going to begin your analysis of student work with actual student samples. You're going to collect student work and assessment data along with student scores and the scoring criteria, and then complete steps 1 through 4 on the ASW template. I'll talk more about that in the online class as well. Prepare and post the student work test data and scores to the discussion forum and your analysis of student work template with steps 1 through 4 completed in the discussion forum. The analysis of student work, the traditional test items bank, and there's a reflection that goes along, there's a checklist that goes along with the traditional test items. All of those documents are found in Module 11 or in the actual discussion forum. You'll find the handouts. Refer to the submission schedules for Module 11 and 12 on the course website. The analysis of student work crosses over Module 11 and Module 12. It crosses over a 1.5 week period because you're starting it, going to meet together, talk about it, and then you're going to finish it. Traditional test items, on the other hand, is just your week-long assignment. So you let me know if you have any questions. You can send an email to me, and I look forward to amazing sets of traditional test items from you. Happy test making.